Amanda requested that I do a video on the first two temples, and so that's what I'm doing right now. The first thing that I want to say is I feel honored to be able to do these videos and do these studies with you, but I also want to say I might focus on certain things that that God might be showing you something totally separate. So don't cheat yourself. Don't cheat yourself by just listening to my videos. It's good for us to come together and do a study. And, I love that you guys are filling yourself with good teaching and the Word of God. But please, please make sure that you don't just limit what's written in the Word by, what He's showing me. The first things that I just want to mention is kind of the background, the context to what God was doing with David. And what is it that makes a temple a temple? The thing that makes a temple is the presence of God. That's why when the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, when Jesus tabernacled among us, that's why that language is being used. That's why Jesus said, tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it again in 3 days. And he was talking about his own body. That's why when Jesus went and spoke with the Samaritan woman at the well, and he said, a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship God in the Spirit and in the truth, the way the Father truly desires. True worshipers must worship in the Spirit and in the truth. In response to her saying, oh, you Jews say that we're supposed to worship, in Jerusalem or on the mount or in the temple or whatever. Jesus was saying a time is coming and has now come because he had the presence of God. He had the Spirit of God and was tabernacling among us. He was the temple. At that point, there was a shift. That's where the presence of God was and is coming, because once Jesus was glorified, everyone who believes in him is given the Holy Spirit. And indeed, it is his Spirit that makes us truly believe in him. No one can believe in him without the Holy Spirit. And we're talking about true belief. We're not talking about that counterfeit Christian, I believe that he was raised. I believe, that thing they do when they dunk you underwater and they say, now repeat these words. Do you believe? And poof, you're a Christian. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about those who truly believe and who obey. They bear the fruit of believing. You're going to see here as we read in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 that even though Solomon dedicated the temple, he built this temple, and they, the word goes into great detail about how Solomon built it, the measurements, the craftsmanship, the ornamentation. Solomon could do all that, and he could even pray and dedicate the temple to God. Does that make it God's temple? I mean, Mormons do that. Does that make it God's temple? No, God has to respond. And that's exactly what he did in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, is he said, okay, I've heard your prayer and I've chosen this place as a temple for my name, as a temple for my dwelling. And I'll remain here as long as you do not go off to serve other gods, as long as my people remain my people. It's the same thing in you. As long as when he chooses you as a temple, as long as you continue in his name and you continue to obey him and fan into flame his Holy Spirit, he will remain there. But if you do not, well, we're going to read about that if you do not when we get to 2 Chronicles chapter 7. So up until this point, his presence was understood to reside in the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was very, very special. That's where God's presence resided. And that Ark of the Covenant was moved into the tabernacle, into a room called the Holy of Holies. And no one entered that room except for one day a year when atonement was made for the Israelites. And atonement was made by the high priest. And he could not, as you see when God tells Moses, don't let Aaron just come in willy-nilly. He can't just enter the Holy of Holies. He had to wear certain clothes. It had to be, the Day of Atonement. There was a certain way to enter in. You understand that? Like, we can't just burst into the presence of God and be like, hey, I'm feeling fear today. Can you calm me down and make sure that you do this and that? That's how we pray. That's the disrespect that we bring to God. Do we not? Why are you making me feel like this? Why aren't you talking to me? Why are you putting me through these things? We have to enter into his presence. We need to get ourselves dressed in the correct attire to present ourselves to the Lord. And then we go to him as Esther did, and we say, if it pleases you, Lord, if I've won your favor, and if you think it a good thing to do, here's my petition. That's a very different way of approaching God, isn't it? It's a disciplined way. It requires some sort of self-examination, because if you're saying, if I've won your favor and he convicts you that there's something you're dirty inside of you, you had better go deal with that than to sit there and have the gall to ask him for anything. You had better go deal with that. So you don't just say those words, but it's a matter of personal examination to bring yourself to him after you have already taken a look at yourself. Is there anything that I need to clean up right now? What's he raising in me? What is he convicting me of? Lord, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do my journaling work right now. Please lay my heart bare before you. It's already bare before you. Search my heart. Convict me. Raise in me what you would like me to deal with. And you do that work, and then you go to him. And I heard about a month or two ago, someone said to me, yeah, this is a lot of work. It's a lot of work. I can't really do this every day because it takes forever. It takes an hour a day. Oh, I'm sorry. You're that important. You don't have an hour a day to devote to doing the work that is required in your covenant? Well, I don't have an hour a week to work with you. How about that? That is truly annoying to me. I have no patience for it. And I don't think I'm supposed to, because that is utter wickedness. That is a heart that does not care about God. I mean, what did you think you were here for? What are you so busy with? Because where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, the Ark of the Covenant had been in this tent called the Tabernacle. And David was distressed by this. And he said, here I am living in a house of cedar when God's presence, God is remaining in a tent. Something's wrong with this picture. And David says, I desire to build a house for you, Lord. And God loved that. He loved that. But he told David, you're not going to be the one to do it. Your son is. And so Solomon was tasked with building this temple. And Solomon started out really well. Solomon started out with a good heart. He was in charge of the people and he wanted to lead them with wisdom. And God asked him, what would you like, Solomon? And he said, I'd like the wisdom to lead this people. And God said, you could have had anything. And that's what you asked for. You didn't ask for riches. You didn't ask for anything of yourself. And because of that, I'm going to give you wisdom as has never been had before and never will be. And I'm also going to give you everything else. I'm going to add everything else unto you. Hey, what's that come from? Jesus even references Solomon when he talks about that in the Gospels. He says, even the grass of the field, Solomon in all his splendor was not clothed like this grass of the field. Don't be worrying about all of the things that you worry about. The birds don't sow or reap, and yet God provides for them. Look how the grass is clothed. Solomon in all his splendor was not even clothed as one of these. Seek first what? The kingdom of heaven and righteousness. That's what Solomon was seeking. That's how he started out. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and righteousness, and all these things, all of the things that you need. Your Father knows that you need to eat. He knows you need clothes. He knows that you need a roof over your head. Seek righteousness and the kingdom first, and all of these things will be added to you. These things are easy for the Lord. So Solomon was given wisdom. He was given wealth. And he built the first temple of God. He built that first house of God. Look at everything that he did. And then he ended up marrying foreign women and serving their foreign gods. And God divided up his kingdom through his son Rehoboam. That is such an utter shame. And it is an example to us because Solomon was a good man. He started out as a good man. But what does the word say? The word says that if you start out righteous and you turn to wickedness, you will die. But look at everything Solomon did. He built the house. He was David's son. He asked for wisdom. He was given wisdom. And he turned to wickedness. So what will happen? This isn't a matter of judgment. This is a matter of discernment. What does the word tell you will happen? The word tells you that if you start out righteous and you turn to wickedness, none of that righteousness will be attributed to you. It will not be to your credit. You will surely die. Now, I don't know if anything happened on Solomon's deathbed. I don't know what went on between him and God. So I can't speak to any of that. I can't speak to judgment. What I'm saying to you is, if you start out righteous and you turn to wickedness, you are playing with fire. None of that righteousness will be attributed to you. God can do whatever he wants. He can reconcile someone on their deathbed, but why would you even play with that? How do you know? How do you know that that's going to happen? How do you know you'll ever even have a deathbed? You know what I'm saying? So Solomon built the temple of God. He brought all of his best men in. They built the temple of God. And the temple was dedicated during the Festival of Tabernacles. What's the Festival of Tabernacles? Why does God want you to celebrate it? He wants you to observe the Festival of Tabernacles to remember that God had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when he brought them out of Egypt, when he brought them out of bondage. It's interesting, too, that God's presence in the Ark of the Covenant, or as represented in the Ark of the Covenant, was also living in a temporary shelter for a period of time, right? Was living in that tabernacle, that tent. You also are living in a temporary shelter right now. You are going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye when you participate, God willing, in the first resurrection, and you will receive a glorified body and you'll be like the angels. You're wandering through the wilderness right now. You're living in a temporary shelter. And that was the time during which Solomon knew that he was supposed to dedicate the temple. In 1 Kings 6:38, in the 11th year, it says, in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, B-U-L, the 8th month, the temple was finished in all its details according to its specifications. He had spent 7 years building it. So even though Solomon had completed the temple in the 8th month of the year, he waited an entire year, almost an entire year, in order to dedicate the temple during the Festival of Tabernacles. Isn't that interesting? So there was something there, because he completed it in the 8th month, but the Festival of Tabernacles is in the 7th month, in the month of Ethanim. So there was something about the Festival of Tabernacles that Solomon knew that he needed to dedicate the temple during that time, and ended up waiting almost an entire year. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. Now, while Solomon was building the temple, the word of the Lord came to Solomon. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 11. The word of the Lord came to Solomon, as for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, observe my laws, and keep all my commands and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David, your father. So through you, I'm going to fulfill the promise I gave to David, your father. And so that is the reason why, when God decided to parcel out, to separate, divide the kingdom, he didn't do it through Solomon. For the sake of David, he didn't do it through Solomon. He did it through Solomon's son, because he was being faithful to his servant David. And I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel. So Solomon built the temple and completed it. He lined its interior walls with cedar boards, paneling them from the floor of the temple to the ceiling, and covered the floor of the temple with planks of juniper. He partitioned off 20 cubits at the rear of the temple with cedar boards from floor to ceiling to form within the temple an inner sanctuary, the most holy place. The main hall in front of this room was 40 cubits long. The inside of the temple was cedar carved with gourds and open flowers. Everything was cedar. No stone was to be seen. In 1 Kings 6:19, we see he prepared the inner sanctuary with the temple to set the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord there. 1 Kings 6:21, it says Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. Now, the temple, as you're hearing, I'm not even reading a percentage of what is written about the ornamentation of the temple and the craftsmanship of the temple. It was very grand. If you read that description of what was being made, it was extremely grand and beautiful. The altar covered in bronze, the gold that adorned the temple. But you remember that, and so this was kind of the pride and joy. It was like the apple of their eye, of the Israelites' eye. God dwells among us. That was a source of honor. But you see some reference that Jesus makes to the Pharisees, that they neglected to understand what actually made the temple holy. They would swear by the gold of the temple rather than understanding that it's the temple that makes the gold holy, not the gold that makes the temple holy. They started to trust in the world rather than God, setting up things in the world that the world deems to be important rather than understanding that God is what makes everything holy. God is the one who determines whether something is beautiful or not. Remember that while he's bringing you low, because there's a time, and I think about this from time to time in my own personal experience. I was adorned in the world. Beautiful clothing, shoes, handbags, jewelry, stuff. And people probably look at me now and think, well, there's a plain woman. She's just plain. I looked good by the world's standards. Dyed hair, makeup. I'm not dressed in any of that now. And yet, when I take that up with God, he talks to me about what he deems to be beautiful. That all of those things are going to pass away. But that the beauty that he is building in me, the beauty that he has restored in me, is not the beauty of the world. And for that reason, I don't do videos or things like that, because I know the tendency of human beings. I know what my own tendencies are by my flesh. To look at someone and say, you know, they don't look so good. Do I really want to take this message from them based on what they look like? That's the tendency of our flesh. That's the foolishness of our flesh. And I don't want that to be a stumbling block to you or a distraction to you. When you're just hearing my voice and you're hearing the message, you have to get quiet. You have to go inward. You have to go to God and ask him, is what she's saying true? You have to feel, because there's nothing to distract yourself with. There's nothing shiny or pretty. It's just the message. So how does that relate to this? Solomon covered the inside of the temple with pure gold, and he extended gold chains across the front of the inner sanctuary, which was overlaid with gold. Does God need all that? He doesn't necessarily need all that. I mean, Solomon built him a beautiful house, and yet it's nothing. There are plenty of buildings that have beautiful architecture, cathedrals, that are detestable to God, that he chooses. He says, I'm not inhabiting that. Same thing with people. I am not inhabiting that. God decides what he's going to inhabit, what he's going to choose, and he's the one who makes it holy. Stop saying that you have a good heart. God is the one who makes you holy. You don't have anything good in you except for God. So if there's good coming from your heart, it's because of him. It's because he has chosen to inhabit you, and he has chosen to move you by his mercy and sovereign choice. 1 Kings 8:17, my father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, you did well to have it in your heart to build a temple for my name. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David, my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord promised, and I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. 1 Kings 8:27, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? You hear what he's saying? It's kind of silly to think like, okay, God is just going to be contained in this Ark of the Covenant. God is contained in, whatever. But I mean, he wanted us to understand the symbolism of his presence being there, and the symbolism of us making a pilgrimage to him, to this temple, to be in his presence, and preparing ourselves to enter into that pilgrimage to be in his presence. And we just fling the door open and we're like, why are you doing this to me? We throw everything on the ground, including ourselves, and start throwing a tantrum. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Entitled and foolish. If you are that temple, if there was a temple that you were supposed to pilgrimage to and prepare yourself to enter in order to participate in a particular holy day, but yet you are the temple and you carry around the presence of God, how much more responsibility is on you right now to maintain that holiness, to maintain the cleanliness of that temple every single day? But I don't have that time. But it takes like an hour a day. How much more responsibility do you have on a daily basis to maintain the temple of God? I'm struck by the heart of Solomon at that time, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I've built? This temple, in all its splendor, in everything that Solomon did, all of the money that he spent on it, all of the craftsmanship, the work that went into it, the detail, the ornamentation. And can you imagine being Solomon, looking at that temple and being like, is this good enough for God? Is there anything that I could make that would be good enough for God? I mean, we should be feeling that every day. Am I really good enough for God to dwell in? But we have the opposite attitude. The very opposite attitude, that we're so special. Oh my goodness, the honor and glory that God has been bestowed to be able to occupy us. He is the blessed one. 1 Kings 8:22. Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands towards heaven and said, Lord, the God of Israel, there's no one like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You know, I want to tell you something. I'm talking about this right now, and I feel convicted. I feel unworthy. I feel dirty. You know, there's something so dumb that God is convicting me of today, that he's cleaning up in me that I've been holding on to, that I don't want to get rid of, right? Or it's not even something like he's just been calling me into a fast to get my body disciplined with food and that kind of thing. And I'm sitting here thinking, or feeling rather, his conviction of, I'm not worthy, I'm not clean. And as I'm taking that up with him, I feel his kindness and his love. You know, he doesn't always, sometimes he deals with me in his anger. Sometimes he deals with me in his wrath and in sternness. And right now, I feel his gentleness and his love telling me this is why it's important, you know, because sometimes I think it's not that important, Lord. Why do you have to, why do you got to chase me down on every single thing? But it is important. It's important to him. And he knows how to move us into standing in this covenant. I don't get to tell him what's important and what's not. If I'm undisciplined, it's going to hinder the plan that he has in me and through me. Lord, the God of Israel, there's no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You've kept your promise to your servant David, my father. With your mouth you've promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today. Now, Lord, the God of Israel, keep for your servant David, my father, the promise you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a successor to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If your descendants are careful in all they do to walk before me faithfully as you have done. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. Now, this is the promise, okay? He hasn't failed to have a successor. And Solomon, his son, had to complete being on that throne. And that's why God, through Solomon's son, Rehoboam, split up the kingdom. But see, Jesus still came from his bloodline, didn't he? That's how the promise was fulfilled. And now, God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy. Lord, my God, hear the cry and prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open toward this temple night and day, this place of which you said, my name shall be there, so that you will hear the prayer of your servant, the prayer your servant prays toward this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Now, why are they praying toward that place? Because that's where the presence of God is. The Holy Spirit has not been given yet. So when you see that there are certain religions who pray to the east or they pray towards something, you don't need to pray towards something. You have him inside of you. You pray in the spirit and in truth. You worship in the spirit and in truth. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive. When anyone wrongs their neighbor and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act. Okay, so if they're making an oath with their neighbor, and they come and swear that oath before your altar in this temple, why would they need to do that? Why isn't it enough just for them to swear that oath from one person to another person? Because anything that you do to other people, you are doing to him. You understand what he's teaching them? Anything you're promising, you're the light of the world, you're the salt of the earth, you're in his image, you are bearing his image. Anything that you swear to someone else, you are swearing to him. Judge between your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the land you gave to their ancestors. when the heavens are shut up and there's no rain because your people have sinned against you, and when they pray toward this place and give praise to your name and turn from their sin because you've afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants, your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land you gave your people for an inheritance. Is Solomon praying in the name, by the way? Is he praying with understanding and wisdom of what God requires and what matters to him and what is his heart? Or is Solomon just praying willy-nilly, hey, will you do these things? Of his own understanding, of his own will. Solomon is praying in the will of the Father. When famine or plague comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, or when an enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or a plea is made by anyone among your people Israel, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts, and spreading out their hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Forgive and act. Deal with everyone according to all they do, since you know their hearts, for you alone know every human heart, so that they will fear you all the time they live in the land you gave our ancestors. As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm when they come and pray toward this temple. Then hear from heaven your dwelling place. Do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, and may know that this house I have built bears your name. Okay, you hear the heart? You hear the understanding that Solomon has? As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for they will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm when they come and pray toward the temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place. So is he telling God what to do? Is he telling him of some kind of understanding that Solomon has? Or is he telling him because of the understanding he has from God, that God has destined that salvation would come from the Jews to the foreigner? He's praying in the will of God. When your people go to war against their enemies wherever you send them, and when they pray to the Lord toward your city, the city that you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause when they sin against you. For there's no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to their enemies, who take them captive to their own lands, far away or near. And if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, and say, we've sinned and we've done wrong, we've acted wickedly. And if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies who took them captive, and pray to you toward the land you gave their ancestors, toward the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built for your name, then from heaven your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Forgive all the offenses they've committed against you, and cause their captors to show them mercy. For they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out of Egypt, out of that iron smelting furnace. May your eyes be open to your servant's plea and to the plea of your people Israel, and may you listen to them whenever they cry out to you. For you singled them out from all the nations of the world. From all the nations of the world, okay? That's you as well. You're not an ethnic nation. You're a nation that's being pulled together by God's Spirit. For you singled them out from all the nations of the world to be your own inheritance, just as you declared through your servant Moses when you, sovereign Lord, brought our ancestors out of Egypt. So let me explain something to you. People understood at one time that what God was doing was not because of them. He could have chosen any nation. This is not an ethnic thing. This is not a anything thing. He could have chosen anyone, but he chose the Jewish people, and they became stiff-necked. They started to think, oh, well, this is because of how special we are. And this was done as an example to us. We are so dumb and foolish because they didn't even have an example. We have an example of this having already been done, and yet we say things and have attitudes as though there's something so special about us. Oh, he saw my heart. He must have seen my heart. He must have seen how good I am and that I had a good heart. What do you mean that you have a good heart? No, that's not how it went. And if that's what we think, we're not in him. He predestined those as objects of his mercy. If there's anything good in us, it's because God put it there. It isn't of us. It's of him. And if we're one of the ones, then we're going to start walking in the way that he requires. We're going to obey the things that he requires, and we're going to bear fruit according to his will. which means we're going to be the opposite of the world. We won't be adorned in that. We're going to be plain Janes, according to the world. We're going to have to get comfortable being who he has called us to be, what he knows is beautiful, what he knows is good, what he knows is right. And we will not be the important people of the world. Let me tell you that. We will not be the important people of the world. As a matter of fact, we'll be hated by the world. You ready for that? You ready to pick that up? Well, let's see. Let's see when he starts moving you into it. If you're going to chicken out, if you're going to get scared, if you're going to start looking back and romanticizing what you had in the world. When Solomon had finished all these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands spread out toward heaven. He stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. May the Lord our God be with us as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or forsake us. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him, and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servants and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands as at this time." Do you hear what Solomon is praying? Is he praying, may you just grant all your people an easy life, relent from us, let us rest, do everything for us that we don't want to do or we're too lazy to do. Send us your Messiah so that he can just pay it all and we can be lazy, wicked servants. He didn't say that. What did he say? May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep the commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and there is no other. And may our hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands as at this time. The heart there is a lot like the prayer that the way that Jesus taught us to pray. Seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, right? Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive the debts of others. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. The heart is in the name of God. Give us this day our daily bread, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. Thy kingdom, not my kingdom, thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us your instruction. Feed us on every word that comes from your mouth. Give us each day what we need in order to uphold your cause. Then the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120 sheep. 120,000 sheep and goats. Big difference. So the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of the Lord. On that same day, the king consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple to the Lord, and there he offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings, because the bronze altar that stood before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat of the fellowship offerings. So Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly, people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. They celebrated it before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 days more, 14 days in all. On the following day, he sent the people away. They blessed the king, and they went home joyful and glad in their heart for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. Now watch what happens. Because he dedicated the temple, doesn't mean God has responded yet. Chapter 9, 1 Kings chapter 9. When Solomon had finished building the temple of the Lord in the royal palace and had achieved all he had desired to do, the Lord appeared to him a second time, as he appeared to him at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I've heard the prayer and the plea that you have made before me. I've consecrated this temple, which you have built by putting my name there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. As for you, if you walk before me faithfully, with integrity of heart and uprightness, as David your father did, and do all I command and observe my decrees and laws, I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised David your father when I said, you shall never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I've given you, and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I've given them, and will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. Israel will then become a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and will scoff and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. Okay, so if God is bringing something on you, what's the question you need to ask? That is why the Lord brought all this disaster on them. If he's bringing disaster on you, what's he doing? Is he disciplining you? Is he chastising you? Is he calling you to address something? Has he brought judgment on you? Or is he a pansy God? Is he a lying God? No, this is what he does. Now, what did he do with the second temple? When he brought the second temple down, why do you think Jesus said, you see these stones? Not one will be left on another. Was he fulfilling the promise that he made to Solomon? Should the people have recognized that when the second temple was destroyed, that there was a reason? The apple of their eye. God's presence is among us. We're his people. Why was that second temple destroyed, guys? And is there another temple that's supposed to be built? No more temples made by human hands. Now, that's the reference that I was talking about. You know, if you're not familiar with Scripture, Kings mirrors Chronicles, Second Chronicles. So that's the reference that I was talking about when God responds to Solomon. And he's very clearly said, this is the covenant that I'm making with you. I've chosen this place. But if you go and do these things, my heart will always be here. I will watch over it. You will be my people. Here is the promise I'm making with you. You will have a forever throne in Israel. But if you don't, if you go off to serve other gods, do you see the if-then covenant here? This is a covenant that we're supposed to understand. So when I say to you that the Antichrist is extending a covenant, that is an anti-covenant. If you know your covenant, then you know when someone is extending a covenant that's in opposition to it. And you're able to say, no, that is the exact opposite of what God has said. No, when you're talking to me about climate change and global warming, I know better where this comes from. Because I know my covenant. Because I know what my God says. And he says that when he sends these things, let's go to 2 Chronicles chapter 7. When Solomon finished praying, the fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offerings and the sacrifices, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The priests could not enter the temple of the Lord because the glory of the Lord filled it. When all the Israelites saw the fire coming down and the glory of the Lord above the temple, they knelt on the pavement with their faces to the ground, and they worshipped and gave thanks to the Lord, saying, he's good, his love endures forever. Then the kings and all the people offered sacrifices before the Lord. And King Solomon offered a sacrifice of 22,000 head of cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all the people dedicated the temple of God. The priests took their positions, as did the Levites, with the Lord's musical instruments, which King David had made for praising the Lord, and which were used when he gave thanks, saying, his love endures forever. Opposite the Levites, the priests blew their trumpets, and all the Israelites were standing. Solomon consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple of the Lord. And there he offered burnt offerings and the fat of the fellowship offerings, because the bronze altar he made could not hold the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat portions. So Solomon observed the festival at that time for 7 days, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly, people from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. On the 8th day, they held an assembly, for they had celebrated the dedication of the altar for 7 days. Okay. So they're celebrating the dedication of the altar for 7 days, and the festival for 7 more. On the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people to their homes, joyful and glad in heart, for the good things the Lord had done for David and Solomon and for his people Israel. When Solomon had finished the temple of the Lord in the royal palace and had succeeded in carrying out all he had in mind to do in the temple of the Lord and in his own palace, the Lord appeared to him at night and said, I've heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself as a temple for sacrifices. Now listen to what he says. When I shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or command locusts to devour the land, or send a plague among my people, hello? COVID, maybe? Global warming? If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayers offered in this place. I have chosen and consecrated this temple so that my name may be there forever. My eyes and my heart will always be there. Then he goes on to reference the promise he made to David, that if Solomon walks in those ways, he'll never fail to have a successor to rule over Israel. So David had a successor to rule over Israel. Solomon did not. God cut that off in Solomon's son. But if you turn away and forsake the decrees and commands I've given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will uproot Israel from my land, which I have given them, and I will reject this temple I have consecrated for my name. I will make it a byword and an object of ridicule among all peoples. This temple will become a heap of rubble. All who pass by will be appalled and say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this temple? People will answer, because they have forsaken the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who brought them out of Egypt, and have embraced other gods, worshiping and serving them. That is why he brought all this disaster on them. If then covenant, if you obey, then you will be saved. If you do not, then you will not. And not only will you not be saved, but you'll be punished. If you obey, then you'll be blessed. Leviticus 26. If you disobey, you will be punished. Leviticus 26. This is the covenant of God. So what is the anti-covenant? Anything that is in opposition to that. What is the covenant of the Antichrist? Anything that is in opposition to your covenant with Christ. It's not rocket science. So if you have a covenant being extended right now, Laudato Si, with the 10 commandments of climate change, what's that? Blasphemy. If you have a covenant being extended to you of submit to the science gods, or else, of take our jab and our poisons, or else, well, what would you call that? Would you call that an anti-covenant? Do you think the people who know their God will firmly resist that? Or do you think that they'll go along with it? And I'm not talking about people who are like, I don't trust it. I don't trust our government. I'm not talking about them. They're not resisting because of what they know of their God. They're resisting because of something else. I'm talking about those who know their God, those who know that he is the Lord our healer, that he passes over his people who obey him and respect him and invoke the blood of the Lamb over their doorway, aka in their hearts. The people who know that that is a field that fundamentally denies Christ and takes up everything by the work of their hands. You know, science doesn't just deny the creator in human beings, it denies the creator in the world. It doesn't just say that humans evolved, it says that the world is evolving. That was part of the premise of Darwin. When he was in Chile during the earthquake and the tsunami that destroyed Concepcion in 1835. That was his premise. Oh, the world is also evolving. Not God is angry. Not God is, trying to get our attention. We didn't have all these natural disasters, quote unquote natural disasters, thousands of years ago, guys. And if you have any common sense whatsoever, you can look at just your lifetime and say, something going on. Something's coming like a flood. You got to step back and look at things contextually. There was no disease prior to God putting diseases on the Egyptians, which is the reason why he said to his people, if you obey, I won't put any of these diseases on you. Look what I'm doing. You see that? It's pretty gross, isn't it? I won't do that to you if you listen to me, if you obey me. What was the last natural disaster, so-called natural disaster, in the Bible? Well, there was an earthquake after Jesus died, and the earth went dark, and there was a major flood. Do you remember that? Do you remember when that happened? Why that happened? And a city was burnt up, and you remember why that happened? Are these just natural disasters, just willy-nilly, or is this God doing something? So there's the first temple, dedicated by Solomon, built by Solomon, dedicated by Solomon. A covenant was extended. This occurred during the Feast of Tabernacles. Even though the temple was completed in the 8th month, he waited almost an entire year to make sure that he dedicated the temple on the Festival of Tabernacles. There's something about that, isn't there? And they celebrated for 14 days. So Festival of Tabernacles, you celebrate for 8 days, but they observed for 14 days. 7 days before the Festival of Tabernacles, they were observing the dedication of the altar. So that's something else that we want to take note of. This video's already gotten long enough, so I'm going to do the second temple in a separate video. We'll do part 1 and part 2. I hope you've enjoyed part 1.